Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see so many of you here. Welcome to the Hilton City Center. I'm Milwaukee Press Club President Mary Ann Lazarski from Milwaukee PBS. I'm happy to be here today for this important community conversation, Behind the Headlines, Violent Crime in Milwaukee, Time for Solutions. I would like to introduce our panel of community leaders. Ashanti Hamilton, Director of Milwaukee Office of Violence Prevention, for being here. Kenneth Harris Jr., Associate Professor of Justice Public Policy at Concordia University and radio host of The Truth 101.7 FM. Fire Chief Aaron Lipski. And Nicole Waldner, Assistant Chief, Milwaukee Police Department. Once again, thank you all for being here. Before we get started, I need to thank a few of the event sponsors. Our supporting sponsors are the Greater Milwaukee Association of Realtors, the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce, and Visit Milwaukee. A special thanks to our event partner, WisconsinPolitics.com. WizPolitics.com, I'm sorry. I would also like to thank Marcus Hotels and Resorts for hosting this event. Now I'd like to introduce our media panel. Ashley Luthern, reporter, Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Aaron Maybin, anchor reporter, Fox 6 News. And Vince Vitrano, host of 620 WTMJ, Wisconsin's Morning News. Vince will also be our moderator for today's conversation. So let's begin our program. Once we're finished with the media panel, there will be time for questions from the audience. Right? Please welcome Vince Vitrano.
Mary Ann, thank you. And if you'll allow me an opening statement of sorts, thank you all for being here. You're likely familiar with the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads, a commentary, a critique of the media, not necessarily suggesting it's unjustified. And actually, I hope to strongly believe that we in the media ought to be open to scrutiny, that we ought to review how we serve our communities, and I hope to actually pursue some lines of questioning in that regard to our panel today as well. But with regard to that statement, it suggests that in an effort to drive readership, viewership, listenership, or ratings of some kind, that we sensationalize in the media issues of violent crime and other matters. And can I just say I am personally exhausted in having this conversation. And whether it be amongst friends, amongst colleagues, or on the radio show that I host on WTMJ, I am exhausted, as I imagine many of you are as well. And I share that because I would most mornings rather talk about almost anything else than this. News, by definition, is that which is new. And so if every morning the folks who listen to our program are tuning in or read our newspapers or watch Fox 6 are tuning in and seeing and hearing the same story with the same people and the same sound bites and the same commentary. And I'm to pound my fist every morning and talk about how this must stop. I think the exhaustion certainly has filtered down to our constituencies, where people have shared with me, I just turn it off. So here comes Bob and Brian. Those guys are having fun, right? So I take no joy, I think my colleagues here as well, in continuing to do these same types of stories over and over again. And therefore I applaud you, because I imagine there's a level of exhaustion in this room as well, for being here today, for engaging in this conversation, and perhaps having the hope that maybe those of us in this room and friends of ours can contribute to some solutions that start to gain some traction. So I'm hopeful for that today, and I, again, appreciate everyone being here today, especially our panel. And Chief Lipski, I'll start with you simply because we'll share a lot of statistics today. These numbers are up, these numbers are going in the right direction, the wrong direction, what have you, but each of these numbers that we will discuss today has human faces. And it's your first responders, your men and women in the med units, who are often first on these scenes of violent crime, or we have multiple victims of reckless driving. And in the case of violent crime, they're the difference between whether we're reporting on a shooting or a homicide, because they're out there saving lives. So if you could address what your men and women are seeing when they arrive on these scenes and the human toll this is taking in our neighborhoods?
Sure, thank you. So I feel like I'm a little bit of a, beating the same drum over and over again when I talk like this. And I want to try to be very sensitive to not sensationalizing something by talking about how bad it is, right? But, I guess what we probably collectively feel in this city like we're at the bottom of this pit, and someone throws in a few handfuls of soil and is like, look, it's better now. And we're just not there. And the human toll of the person who's been shot or stabbed or beaten or thrown out of a car, that is bad enough. And I think that is probably where most people suspect the greatest injury occurs. And it is, that's what we go up, we plug holes and we bandage and we rush on a stretcher into the ambulance out to Freighter Trauma Center, and what's gonna happen is what's gonna happen. And that can be difficult to look at and deal with and witness and put your hands on. But the actual thing that hits in the core of the brain and the heart of firefighters and paramedics dealing with these things is the mother and the father standing there wailing from the core of their being in anguish and pain. And you're doing everything you can and you're not winning some of them. And that's your work environment. Over and over and over and over and over again. And I'm not 100% certain what people's perceptions are of what firefighters and EMTs are capable of absorbing. But it isn't this, not at this pace. And I would say this, if that's how we feel, how are the families and the neighbors and the witnesses to this, where it's happening most frequently, feeling? Because that has to be a whole nother level. So we're doing what we can, but we're seeing it. We're seeing it. We're seeing compassion fatigue, physical fatigue, exhaustion, and a sort of an apathy, almost a fatalism. Like, well, here we go again. And we're technically very good at our treatments and our care and our interventions and what we're doing. But the biggest fear I have is we're going to lose the human element of it. And it's happening in front of us right now. Not a super positive answer for you, but that is what it is.
And Chief, thank you for that response. I think for expediency's sake, I'll just kind of hand the microphone down, and Ashley, you can be next, and we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. To kind of follow up on that, Chief Lipski, and this is also for Assistant Chief Waldner as well, I think when we're looking at problems, it's important to define the problem, get a little bit more information about it, and then talk about some of the solutions or what's driving it. And something that I noticed when I was going through the homicide review data was that our lethality rate for shootings in the city of Milwaukee has risen greatly. So, for example, last year it was a 19% lethality rate. So for every 5 shooting victims, 1 of them died. That's a lot higher than previous years when it was about 15%. And so I was hoping that one or both of you could speak to that, whether it's indicating that some of this violence is much more targeted or personal, or I know obviously MPD has also spoken about the rise in firearms, greater number of shots fired in specific incidents, to get a little bit of a better sense of what's happening there.
I would tell you that it can probably be tied to medically some sort of a randomization of the direction people are shooting when they're shooting guns. And it seems like, well, why would that increase it? It increases it because I believe that randomization comes from a larger number of bullets per shooting being fired. And certainly I think when people are having beef with each other and someone goes out and has made a decision, okay, I'm ending this right now, they shoot into very specific locations. And there's not a lot anybody's going to do for that. And I think that's increasing. I think a lot of this is very, very emotional. This is not a television show, it's not movies. And so when it happens, these are things that are happening hair trigger in many cases, but with a overflow of emotion just coming out right now. And so when people take that sort of action, it's very, very focused at certain parts of the body that don't leave a lot of outs.
So to tie, not that I know anything medical, but in our shootings, he is right. There are, and I think this was in our violent crime report, that we're finding more casings. The switch to make a weapon automatic can be YouTubed and created easily. We just were reviewing the Cinco de Mayo celebration and which one of them was the switch, and you'll see that it sounds just like a machine gun, and that's how much it expels. So now, luckily, no one got hurt for that one because it was in the air. But if you live in the city of Milwaukee, like I don't have ShotSpotter where I live. I say that I am ShotSpotter where I live because I call the police all the time. You can hear the difference, and it's more and more frequent that more bullets are flying. In addition, though, I always caution people when you look at statistics, non-fatal shootings and homicides should be looked at together. Before we start saying, yay, homicides are down, we should look at non-fatal shootings, because some of it, they're not marksmen, right? It's just luck about where they hit somebody. But what I've noticed lately is there's a lot of close proximity shootings. Like they're in the car together. Obviously, there's some sort of relationship. It's an ambush, right? It's literally an assault. It's planned. It's calculated, and so then I think that's leading to it as well.
Staying on that, I looked at the data this morning. Homicides 64 so far this morning, 88 this time last year, 73 this time the year before. So we are seeing kind of the numbers going down, but what really has gone into homicides going down into the city of Milwaukee, what went into that?
Okay, so I'm gonna sound like a huge naysayer right now. We're only in June. Anything can happen. And like I said, I really like to look at the numbers together to get a true. We are down in non-fatal shootings. So if you look at both together, we are down. But I caution any numbers to be looking at a short period of time and saying, yay, look what we did, right? We have to, if we're gonna change society and we're gonna make this different and be safer, we have to look at it in a large increment of time. And the problem is 2020 changed everything. Like 2020 can't even be considered because nothing was normal, right? And so now we have this 2020 in the middle of these statistics that's messing up everything else. We have messaged, we did Summer Guardian, which most of you know, and if you don't, Summer Guardian is where last summer we made targeted patrols based on spot shotter data. You know what I'm talking about. MAD and CAD calls for shots fired, and we were more deliberate in our patrols. Now, we didn't continue that through the winter because that is a summer phenomenon, but we made things more deliberate. Am I gonna take credit or my department for a lower homicide rate? I'd be lying to you guys if I could, okay? It is something we have to look at in totality. I am grateful for it. I know that we are more responsive. And even, like he said, with the statistics, we have a higher clearance rate. It's because the homicides have slowed down. We actually have time to investigate and work on the homicide, right? And that also, clearance rates, some people put a lot of credit to them and other people's don't. What it does, though, is it holds someone accountable for the crime and it stops the retaliation. What we see in Milwaukee with the homicides and the shootings is the retaliatory. And oftentimes when there's a non-fatal shooting, you better believe if they're not gonna cooperate, it's because some street justice wants to occur, and that's when I have a conversation with Director Hamilton. So I'm appreciative of the numbers going down, but I do not wanna get too excited until I can see a change.
Director Hamilton, did you want to add anything to that? Or?
Yeah, I wanted to
Please
add.
answer from the podium.
You want us to answer from the podium?
Please. Thank you.
We'll answer from the podium. But I wanted to add on a theme that Assistant Chief Waldner was speaking to about not being too excited about trending in the right direction. We at least 3 of us here at the table actually graduated from Riverside University High School. Go Tigers. And the reason why that is important is because we graduated in 1991. 1991 was the year that everybody's comparing the highest fatalities, homicides in the city of Milwaukee. They're comparing it back to 1991. And everybody can remember what was happening in the city of Milwaukee in 1991 with the influx of drugs into the community. It was the height of cocaine distribution, height of crack cocaine in the communities, very territorial, a lot of homicides related to drug trafficking, right? Very something specific to point to. And we talk about what the difference are between then and now. I like to talk about the things that are the same, right? There was still concentrated poverty in the communities. There were still institutions that were that people didn't trust and didn't engage. It left communities very vulnerable and not taking advantage of resources that existed in the community in order to overcome some of the challenges that concentrated poverty creates for you in these communities. Some of those things haven't changed. And so long as we're not having an impact in the things that have remained constant, that create violence in the community, then the rise and fall of crime statistics are going to be inconsequential to the long-term stability of creating stable communities. And so I just wanted to follow up on that. That we can't celebrate if we're not having an impact on root causes.
Assistant Chief Waldner, you referenced 2020 and things not being the same since. Not only obviously was that COVID, but also George Floyd, the protests and things that came from that, the defund the police movement. I have spoken with police officers. I grant you this is anecdotal, but some officers have told me that the resulting protests following George Floyd caused them to police less aggressively, as they did not feel that they were supported by the community, supported by City Hall, supported by the Fire and Police Commission, perhaps by their leadership. And I wonder if that is something that you have observed, and regardless whether you believe that that makes us safer or less safe. And I guess Director Hamilton, you can comment on that as well.
Do I have to get up?
Please.
Okay, so I hear that a lot as well. And this is where I think one of the pitfalls of police work is. I get to go to all these meetings, right? I meet with a ton of community members. I get to go before the Common Council and for whatever reason, and hear the back and forth. I get to interact with OVP and the fire department and all the other partners. So I get to feel the support that the officers don't get to feel. And so we just changed the SOP, well, we changed it some time ago, for community policing, and we worked with the CCC on it. And one of the things we put in there was that the role of the community liaison officer has to be rotated through. Because we get these select officers that get to meet people and shake hands and do all the fun stuff, and then we get people that only get to take hitches, right? And they're going to all the shootings that Aaron, sorry for these first names because we've been together a long time. So they get to do, they're taking hitch to hitch to hitch, and they see the sadness and the violence, and a lot of it is hate, or it feels like hate. I can't really actually say it's hate. It's frustration. No one calls us to tell us about their good day, right? They're calling us because everything sucks. In 2020, that was the worst because of George Floyd and everything else. And a lot of the sentiment back then was, but it didn't happen here. But we're not Minneapolis. And things like that. And so there was like this misunderstanding. I think we get it overall that anything that happens nationally to blue affects blue. We get that. I understand that their bad actions have an effect on our communities. But I also get the other half of that where I get to talk to the community leaders. And I have to say, everyone's like, oh, she's gonna love her mayor. Actually, this mayor really likes police and he does support us. And for the most part, I have a really good relationship with the alders and the people I interact with. And the FPC at times, right? I mean, it's public, you guys all see, so I'm not gonna lie. But it is, I get to be part of that, and so does the executive staff and the captains and the CLOs, but the hitch takers and the detectives that are going to shooting after shooting with uncooperative people, they don't get to see that. They don't get to go to the religious, we have a lot of religious support with our neighborhood churches in our communities, within our districts, and they don't get to do the stuff that makes their job important and makes them remember why their job is so important. So we have to do a better job as this police department with this new SOP of getting everybody incorporated so they all get to be a part of that and get to see that. So I believe you when you tell stories about officers. And then some of those officers, I gotta wonder, do I want them on the job? I mean, that's the truth. Not everyone should be an officer, and if you shouldn't, then you should go. Because if this is not where you want to police in Milwaukee, where there's diversity and social differences and like all these wonderful things, if you can't see that, then peace out. You gotta go. So, it's both.
If I could ask you too, Director Hamilton, so, you know, what I'm hearing from some of these officers and what Assistant Chief Waldner is referencing also is, I'm gonna take a pass on pulling over that car that has expired tags or no plate or whatever, because I don't wanna deal with the visuals or the idea that there's profiling or that there are other things like that. Is that something that you are hearing? And again, is that what the expectation is in the community? To feel less harassed by police? And is that healthy?
Yeah, so first of all, I want everybody in the room just to realize what's happening, right? And answering this question. The assistant chief just stood before the press corps and said, hold us accountable. And if you don't understand how to police in this community and police with constitutionality and dignity and respect, then you don't need to be in this police department. Right? That's from the leadership. So when we talk about the change in relationship and the feeling of building trust with institutions and what makes this work better, and our ability to be able to say, hey, we want to assist. We want to bring community members in to assist in de-escalating and moving retaliatory violence and decreasing that, and being able to operate in a safety environment. OVP is the new Office of Community Wellness and Safety. In order to do that, it takes partnerships and it takes the ability to be able to have trust in the community to actually partner in helping communities be more healthy and more safe. And it's very difficult to have law enforcement actually say that, right? And to come out and be forceful and be, very honest about that. So that's one. Two, policing in communities that are as large as this always depends on cooperation from the community that they're policing. The information that they get, the comfort level of being able to navigate, being able to receive information as well as build the right type of relationships and knowing where the problems are and who's actually being affected by, which goes to your point of the question, do people in these communities that are affected by violence want a hands-off approach from police officers? No, they typically, if you look at surveys, they want more presence from police, but they want it in a more dignified and respectful way. And I think that they can work together in order to be able to have an impact in the communities that they're operating in. We want to create a situation where police officers are not being called for every social issue that happens in the community, that there are alternatives than having a police officer show up to solve those issues.
So, Director Hamilton, you might need to go back up there. We were talking a lot about the work that OVP is doing. Obviously, OVP has come under intense scrutiny. Some might argue unfair scrutiny, given the size of the office and the funding that it receives. But can you explain the constellation of direct service that OVP is providing, as well as what community partners you're currently funding through, whether it's ARPA grants or other things like that, and how the effectiveness of both are currently being measured? Because I know that that's obviously come up before council repeatedly.
Sure. And then just first, we like to lean into that scrutiny. We think everybody needs to be held accountable for the activities that's happening in the community. And so not to shy away from that, but we still want to be fair, right? Let's be fair about what a 10 that's currently operating as 5 or 6 office body can do. But the partnerships are extremely important, and the chief and assistant chief mentioned the importance of partnerships. And one of the things that is the focus of this office is to identify best practices that exist, that's been working in other cities, things that the community, the way that they define what a safe community should look like in the communities that we're operating in, and then finding the partners who are willing to deliver that service. And it spans different types of activity. The one that most people are familiar with, and I think is probably the most sexy, thanks to Reggie Moore over there, I think that there's this recognition about the violence interruption portion of this 414 Life and the relationships that they're building both in the healthcare sector as well as with partners and communities. But there's also a large amount of work that's happening in the preventative space where you're cultivating a sense of culture in communities, rebuilding relationships with institutions, and we don't like to have our office be responsible for rebuilding the relationship between law enforcement and the community. That's something that they have to do, and with this leadership and MPDs, they're doing a great job of doing that themselves. But rebuilding relationships with all institutions, right? That the community should be able to lean on when they're trying to change the social norms that exist in that community. That takes partnerships, it takes relationships, and it takes people to help navigate those systems. And so that's a primary focus for us because there's always the struggle for resources. But we don't want to send the message that until the skies open up and billions of dollars fall down, that people have to continue dying in communities because they don't deserve that.
Not long ago, the Office of, you can just stay there really quick. Not long ago, the Office of Violence Prevention announced that they'll be moving away from the health department into a new part of the city. How is that going to impact the way you operate, the way you tackle violent crime?
Well, it should make it a whole lot easier for us. One of the biggest challenges that I had going into the office was the struggle that many community partners had navigating the contractual process of being able to access resources. A lot of the resources that come through the office, we're contracting with a lot of partners out there to try to execute some of the goals of the office. The health department by itself doesn't have that back office infrastructure in order to do that. We're going to DOA where that infrastructure exists. We're also very intentional and conscientious about the city being an entity where all departments are picking up a role in helping prevent violence and create safer communities and finding a role for them to do that. Very difficult to instruct other departments from within the health department. So the Department of Administration, which has these relationships and a number of other programs that should span across the city, whether we're talking about the Department of City Development and Investment in Housing, the library system, which has a huge footprint across the city and providing services, DNS, when we talk about dilapidated housing and the environmental impacts on violence, they play a major role in creating those community standards across the city. We'll be able to coordinate that much better from outside, but we're not losing anything from the health department. All of the infrastructure that we currently have in the health department, all of the partnerships and the guidance that help keep our work focused on a public health strategy, we keep all of that. So we're gaining partners and keeping the ones that we have currently in the health department.
So how do you measure success?
So that's a great question. And primarily, we're not measuring the success by the rise and fall of crime statistics, right? That's a much bigger responsibility that takes a whole lot more partners than just the office. What we want to be able to do is to ensure that the people that we are trying to help, are we addressing the priorities that they are saying needs to be addressed in their community? We're having direct conversations with them, surveying with them about what they feel is achievable and what it is that our partnership with them can help achieve. And I think that's a more realistic approach to how this work should be measured. And then we have to find better ways of telling that story to policymakers who are responsible for funding. One of the partnerships that I think is extremely important for us to be able to work with is the police department, in the sense of, in many ways, we're being judged by the same political measurements. And at least with the current leadership and the way that the city and the county is operating now, we're not allowing our work to be polarized and politicized because we count on each other too much in order to have the impacts in the communities that we're trying to have the impact in the most. So we're very clear to say publicly that in order for them to be successful, we have to be able to do our work right. And in order for us to be successful, they're going to have to do theirs appropriately as well. And we're not afraid to say that publicly.
Dr. Ken, let's get you up here. One of the elements of the state shared revenue plan that is being debated this week in Madison and will ultimately be voted on, at least at this point, includes provisions that will deeply curtail the authority of the Fire and Police Commission in Milwaukee and its civilian oversight, resting more power in the hands of the chiefs. How do you see that playing out and affecting their ability to police, and also the natural politics that occur in all of these conversations?
I'll horse trade with you. When I'm done, I get to make some statements based on what they say. Is that fair? Okay. So,
Fair.
First of all,
This is how it goes when Ken's on my show, too, in the mornings, right?
first of all, it's utterly ridiculous to take power away from the Fire and Police Commission. It was a political move. For some reason, I don't really understand why. You put the chief in a really bad position when you have him and his command staff have to make decisions and procedures that may or may not work, and they get blamed for it or not get time to adjust it, right? Everyone needs someone above them to be able to look over their shoulder and say, hey, do you really want to do that? Are you really thinking, is that correct, right? You've now given that power to the police chief. Whether it's fair or not, I don't know if with all the things that you're asking of a command staff and a police department to do, that you would then say, oh, and by the way, make up your own stuff too. That doesn't make any sense.
The horse trading.
All right.
Okay.
So earlier, first of all, think of this number, 4,420. Got it? 5 days a week. And if my math is off, I went to public school. I'm teasing.
In Chicago.
In Chicago. But Milwaukee's my home now for 30 years.
Riverside.
You have to remember this. Every day, 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, for 24 years, I either heard about it, read about it, I was at it, or signed a report about somebody dying, regardless of how they died. What the city gifted me on retirement was a pension and post-traumatic stress disorder. That is what first responders go through each and every day, number one. Number two, the Homicide Review Commission, they came up with 3 things that are always there when a homicide occurs. And I think we've forgotten that. They had prior contact with each other, right? Criminal record, and alcohol. Those are not things the police can fix. Those are things you and your family fix. And we've been spending an inordinate amount of time blaming the police and making the police do things that they literally cannot do. They go to the homicide after the fact, not before. But yet you expect them to clean up everything. And they can't. Why? Because the people won't act right. And we won't hold them accountable. We keep hearing over the decades that we want the police to work with the community, but I've not heard one person here say we want the community to work with the police.
Thank you.
The police have to constantly change and move and grow and do all these things, and the public gets to act a fool, gets to shoot and kill each other. Can we protest about the kid, the 1-year-old that died, instead of protesting against the police? No, we don't do that. We'll just report about it, and we'll talk about it, and we'll run the story as I've seen over and over and over. But we never say, hey, who did that? Why aren't we protesting about the deaths in our community? My only assumption is you don't care. It's on you. Police don't control homicides, they investigate. It's reactionary. But there's some precursors that are there that you all pretend like you don't see. Poverty, social issues, education, but you don't want to fix those. You prefer to blame the police. And I get complaints, oh, you support the police. Yes, I do. 30 years in law enforcement, 24 with NPD, 6 with another department. So, you've handcuffed the city with the Collins Agreement. You've complained about everything, and then you have the audacity to turn around and say, we expect you to change the city. It's ridiculous. You keep wanting strategy, but what you don't want to hear about are the logistics. In order to clean up the city, you have to arrest people. We have people in the criminal justice system that won't prosecute people. We've had multiple instances of people not being charged correctly, not getting their bail so low that they went out and within hours shot and killed multiple people. But yet when it happens in Waukesha, all of a sudden we got to do something about it. The problem is you keep sending people back to my community. And it only changes when they come back to your community. Why is that? Finally, we have to look at something in logistics in order to fix this. That's everybody. I might have been born and raised in Chicago, but this is home. I raised my children here, and you've got to do a better job of taking care of you, because the criminals in the community are coming from your families.
Assistant Chief, I do want to give you, kind of piggybacking off that, he mentioned the court system. Do you think prosecutors and the courts are doing enough to prevent violent crime in the city? Because often as we do these stories, we see kind of a long list of charges in the past.
So, my bio, I don't know what it says, I didn't read it, I think they took it off the website. But I was in the drug unit for 10 years. And we really focused on like getting people into the federal court system. You know, there was the ceasefire program and all these different programs to keep people in custody. I think 2020, what happened is the floor fell out. Everyone stopped. We didn't stop, but everybody else stopped, right? Courts barely functioned, and now we have this tremendous backlog, which we're still not caught up with. Everyone's open, courts are all functioning, we're taking our cases in, but I did meet with the district attorney shortly after when we were opening up, and how are we gonna prepare for this? And you know, how's the city budget gonna prepare for this? For a couple years, we didn't have any court overtime. And now all of a sudden, we're pushing everything through. But the reality is, not only are we overburdened by calls for service, lack of, like everyone, you go to Noodles and Company and it says you're gonna expect to wait longer because they don't have enough employees. I can't put that sign on our door, but the same thing applies, right? And it does for the House of Corrections and the county jail, and unfortunately the courts also. Part of the reason they couldn't open is because they lost all their court reporters. So all the people went and they found better jobs with more money that city government or county government cannot compete with at all. And so we're struggling to put it together. I think, you know, the police and the district attorneys do work hard on putting cases together. It's constant communication. More work goes behind than what you think or see on TV. But I think right now we're in this role of catch up. And the other problem is we don't have anywhere to put anybody. You know, we're still functioning, I'll just use the juvenile justice system. It was created however many years ago, right? We still have the same place, Lincoln Hills. Still haven't built the other places for kids to go, right? We're still using Lincoln Hills. It's small. And the crimes have changed. We are not dealing with the juveniles of the 70s and 80s. This is a completely different juvenile crowd. And some of the time has to be significant. Or we have to change the process because we're taking in people and we're incarcerating people, but yet, you're gonna see how liberal I am right now. So we keep doing the same things over and over again and expect different results and we don't get them, right? Definition of crazy. Mm-hmm. So why don't we look at them as a systemic change and do things differently? Instead of just serving your time, you have to get a degree. You have to get the trades. We have to get our trade schools in there and actually do something. And then if you're a kid, your family has to go to counseling. And then you have to change that family environment because once they get out and we put them right back where we took them from, nothing is going to change. And it's the same for adults. I mean, I think I have statistics that I prepared that you haven't asked me about yet, but still, I think the median age for shootings or homicide is late 20s, right? So it's not just juveniles. It's grown people too. But we have the same system we've always had, now with less capacity. So I think it takes, and this goes back to what Dr. Harris said, there has to be complete change. I have the authority to arrest and take away freedom, and that's where it stops. You know, I've told Ashanti my dream police department, and it's much of what I just told you, where we go to a neighborhood problem. I can call Safe and Sound. They meet me there. We talk about it. We have a follow-up program. I go to a domestic violence call. I can call any one of our domestic violence, and they work 24 hours too. Wouldn't that be awesome? And then they meet me there, and we can work with the people in the house so that we stop going back. And the fire department can attest to this too. We go back to the same places over and over and over again, and nothing changes, right? So in my dream department, I would call Ashanti and say, okay, this is the kind of problem I have. What resources do you have? Let's get them over there. And I laid it all out, and Ashanti said, you know they expect to get paid, right? I was like, ooh. I forgot that they work on funding too. And I had this, Snow White moment where I was like, this would be so awesome if this is how our community works. But unfortunately, and like Ashanti said, we don't have the resources in place. I think it's possible. I don't think it's gonna happen tomorrow, not even next year by this luncheon. But this is what you imagine your community works. Can I say something about the press since you said we get to talk about you? So this is my other thing. I am very sensitive growing up in Milwaukee and being here of how people view our city. And so when I see things in the news and what you said reminded me of this. Just the other day, we had a Germantown man killed on 95th and Silver Spring, and that's how it was put in the news. Germantown man killed on 95th and Silver Spring. And I was like, okay, so what that does to everybody outside Milwaukee, oh my God, Germantown people, don't go to Milwaukee, right? Don't come to Milwaukee, it's dangerous. Why is Germantown man on 95th and Silver Spring, right? And was that his last known address? And I get that we send out the media updates and we give, very brief, and so the media doesn't get that, but when we broadcast things like that, it says to the people that don't live in our city and don't know our city that it's dangerous. It's not dangerous if you don't go to 95th and Silver Spring looking for something you shouldn't have, right? So that perception drives me crazy because there's so much more going on here. And when people only get their information from the news and that's how we're putting it out, it makes us look a lot worse than we are. Did I answer your question?
Discussion among the panel. Does anyone want to say anything else and to piggyback off that? Just given an opportunity. Dr. Kent, is there something you want to say?
We don't have enough time. I have a show from 4 to 6.
Okay. Fair enough. One aspect of public health and public safety that I wanted to ask about was drug addiction and the overdose crisis that continues to plague our community. I know back in 2015, 2016, when we saw a spike in homicides, a lot of academic research after that pointed to the opioid trade as a possible factor, right? Disputes over that and that sort of thing. So I was hoping Chief Lipski or Assistant Chief Waldner, if one or both of you could speak to what we're currently seeing as it relates to drug fatalities and also the work being done to try to get people help and into treatment, because I know there are several initiatives around that.
Hi, my name is Aaron and I'm a firefighter. Seriously, I feel like in our fair city, and I can attest in partnership with chiefs from across the nation in our urban centers, that we just have a pile of once in a lifetime, all hands on deck things going on at the same time. And we can go back to pre-COVID, we were getting ready for the DNC. Around here, that was an all hands on, when I say all hands on deck, we're stripping resources from everywhere to make these things occur. Boom, active shooter at Molson Coors, boom, COVID, shut everything down. Witness governmental structures absolutely 1,000% unprepared to deal with a pandemic. Fire department steps in, hero stuff. Then, but then, fast forward, not too far, now we are dealing with spiking murder rates, we're dealing with a reckless driving crisis, and an overdose crisis. And each one of these has multiple task forces, committees, consortiums, think tanks, all assigned to solve these problems. So we, not too many months ago, and around here in the city of Milwaukee, we break all the wrong records, right? We had, I think it was 17 or 18 fatalities in 2.5 days, attributable to the use or misuse of illicit drugs. And while that is an anomalous period of time, it certainly increases a trend that we are seeing, whereby if we crashed airplanes into downtown Milwaukee, depending on the size of the airplane, we still wouldn't have as many deaths as from the overdoses annually right now. But we have an enormous amount of stigma associated with drug use, much of it driven by law and order, like the drug user must be wearing a trench coat and skulking down a dark alley. And the problem with it is that's not what it is. It's your family members. It's your coworkers. It's your doctor. It's your grocer. It's the guy who came to fix your roof. It is everywhere. And it is not, at its foundation, a crime. It is a mental health crisis. It is a mental health issue. But we've, for years, been criminalizing it or patting it on the head like the slow puppy, right? And say, I'll just say no. And see, that's not how addiction works. And so, what are we doing? A whole bunch of things, all right? We are attempting to do harm reduction by way of ready access to Narcan. But guess what? The people who sell drugs don't do this to not make more money and then make more money after that. So when we give Narcan out, they start, and these are not hermetically sealed, created in a sterile lab packages of drugs, right? So they start figuring out new ways to make it more potent. So now they're adding fentanyl, carfentanil, wildly potent chemicals, xylazine, and all manner of other things that, guess what these things do? They make the Narcan not as effective or ineffective. And so now we have taken our best swing in the dark. Let's get Narcan on the streets. And I'm going to advocate Narcan forever because it's what we have right now. But now, literally, this junk is so potent that we can administer Narcan. Most people don't want to hang out after we do that. They get up and they want to walk away. They don't want to deal with, potential law enforcement consequences, whatever. They're ashamed, angry, whatever. So a lot of them walk away. We can't kidnap them. And within minutes, go down the alley, turn the corner, go down another alley, walk down the sidewalk. All the Narcan does is it blocks the receptors for the opioids. That's how it works. So it blocks the internal receptors in your body so you're no longer unconscious, depressed respirations, etc. Well, the Narcan has, an effective life, and it's not very long. And the junk is still floating around in your system. So it stops working, and a person re-overdoses after they've been resuscitated. It's not like a magic trick. So we're getting the same people within 10, 20, 30 minutes. So we're adding fentanyl test strips now to the items we hand out. That was recently legalized in the state of Wisconsin. It took forever to do. People I know like hot button programs. We don't want to ever discuss clean needle programs, right? Lord knows if anybody's been covering any BOZA meetings lately, there's a way to spend some time, right? Sorry, I didn't see you there. But you go to the BOZA meetings and you hear everything I just described. You hear fear of that we're going to bring a problem to a neighborhood if we get some medically assisted treatment facilities in the city of Milwaukee, where the problem is the most dense and greatest. But we don't want to bring the problem to the neighborhoods, and I'm here to tell you, it's here. It's already here. You don't want needles in your park, then help the people get healthier who need the needles. So I'm a little bit perturbed about this, as you might imagine. But we are doing everything we can to find people. Our MORI program, the Milwaukee Opioid Response Initiative, anytime we have a Narcan administration, sometimes if we take them to an ER, we meet them at the ER, otherwise we follow up the next day. We go to the person and we ask a simple question. Are you ready? And a lot of people are ready because post-resuscitation, people go through a whole range of emotions. Are you ready? You want to go for treatment? And we get them into medically assisted treatment and long-term care. And we're having some success with this program that the Milwaukee Fire Department invented, incidentally. And so now what? What's the next thing that can happen with it? Well, Now we fight for every dime coming into the city to try to support that program. And I'll let you guys investigate how that's going. Thank you.
Hero stuff.
Go for it, yeah.
But yet the only issue I have is the fact that when crack cocaine hit the city of Milwaukee, that's not what happened. All the black families and all the communities got destroyed, sent to jail. So when are we gonna hold heroin users accountable for the crimes they commit and not blame fentanyl? When are we gonna then make them accountable and go to jail and, watch this, chief, get treatment, get mental health, but lock them up? Because when other people that didn't look like you did it, they went to jail. Destroyed families, destroyed neighborhoods, destroyed communities, homes, but yet today, all of a sudden, it's a mental health issue. And we gotta help these people. The criminals that are using illicit drugs, those criminals?
Yes,
Because they were criminals in 1991 and we put them in jail.
so we should
Same city.
so we should do it wrong still?
But that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you still need to hold them accountable. That's the part that's missing from the argument. Everybody is supposed to be held accountable. Hold them accountable too. You don't have to necessarily destroy their families. You don't have to destroy them. Get them mental health help. Get them counseling. Get them off the drugs. They need to be off the drugs. But all the crimes that were committed because they committed it, let's stop it. There's not a fentanyl problem in America. There's an illicit drug problem in America, and people keep blaming fentanyl for people dying who are already addicted to drugs. It's unfortunate. I've had family members that have died, family members that are addicted. But at the base level, we need to reach that person. Do all the things you talked about, everything. But if you commit a crime with it, you need to be held accountable for it. You don't need to go to, and if that means I have to pay more tax money to have you go to jail, get a degree, go to school, get a trade, and all those things, I have no problem with it. But we gotta stop pretending like when the shade changes, all the things we have to do, now it becomes a mental health issue. No, it's crime. Let's do both.
Assistant Chief, we are in the summer months right now, and numbers show always a rise in violent crime over the summer months. Can you talk to us how you and your officers plan to tackle violent crime this summer?
So we're really encouraging, and I did a message and I don't think anyone saw it, to be honest, right? We went out to the news, I don't think anyone posted, but that's okay.
Send it again.
It
Friday we'll send it.
Oh, right, okay.
So it addressed certain things that were played with every single summer. The additional shots fired, mixed in with fireworks and the misuse of fireworks. This new phenomenon, it's not just Milwaukee, it's national, these street takeovers. I don't understand it really. It's right now, it seems to be a south side thing, but it's Milwaukee, we're small, it'll move. But we have these cruising.
Is that with ATVs or?
Well, yeah, that was what happened last week, and we had ATVs and dirt bikes. And they do street takeovers where they're driving on the sidewalks, they're driving whatever. And this is something that happened within the last few years, these ATVs in the city. And for someone that grew up in the city, I just was like, why? These are hunting things, like go out in the country. But it's not just here, they did it in Racine also. And we've also had these street takeovers just with cars, with regular cruising as well, where they're shutting down. So we're urging people to let us know, because we're old. And so we still follow Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and stuff, and people are on Snapchat and whatever else like my kids talk on. And so we need people who are within these younger people who know what's happening. We need them to tell us. And so we need better information. And so that was like, if you know something, tell us. The other thing, we are starting Summer Guardian again that I spoke about. And we're urging parents to be responsible for their kids. curfew still applies. It is not a free-for-all just because there's no school. And this juveniles being out at all hours, and you've all seen videos of the stolen cars and the things that are done, and their contribution to the reckless driving issue in Milwaukee. So we are urging parents to know where their kids are. I don't know which news station always, I think it's Fox 6 at 10 o'clock. They say, do you know where your kids are? Now it's 11 because there's no school. But it's unbelievable. Also, parents, know where your guns are. The amount of guns on the street is shameful. Like, when I started in 1996, we went out on patrol and someone got a gun and a Crown Royal bag with some weed and some money or some crack or whatever, I was like, oh, you got a gun. Now, everybody has a gun. You know, some legally, I get that. I get open carry, CCW, those are things, and if done responsibly, fine. That's within your rights, but that's not what's happening. People are going into the bars downtown, leaving their guns in their car. And then their car gets stolen or broken into, and not only did the kid that stole the car get a car, but they get this gun also. And so we're encouraging people to gun responsibility. And that goes for parents too. I'm sure you've seen in the news that over the winter time, we had a lot of kids shot by guns in their own house from their parents. They got into a safe, or I remember one specifically, they asked them to put the gun up, so they just put it on a higher shelf, right? So things like that. So we're really urging gun safety this summer and parent responsibility, because we're gonna start targeting curfew, because if you're under 17, you should be at home, and the parents are gonna get the citation as well. And parents are gonna be held accountable when bad things happen to their kids because they weren't watching their kids. So that was the message that was targeted, and then the normal thing about fireworks goes, see your fireworks in a safe place by the professionals. We can't keep having all these fireworks going off in the street in the city. Not to mention they cause fear among the people that live in these communities, and they don't know what they are. Are they shots fired? Are they fireworks? It happens all the time. And then it's not a safe summer for everybody. It's just a safe summer for those that want to go out and cause havoc. So that's what we've been working with.
We'll open it up to questions here momentarily. Let me just follow up on one thing, because for Assistant Chief, your comments were about suburban perceptions of Milwaukee really resonate with me. My wife and I grew up in Wauwatosa, but we were deeply connected to the city. Took the bus in town all the time. I consider myself a city kid. We had our first home in Milwaukee, first two homes, and she was teaching in a suburb. And when her high school students from outside Milwaukee found out that we lived in the city, they were shocked and worried for us. And I had the exact same conversation with so many of them that you detailed of, if you're not somewhere where you're not supposed to be, doing some things you're not supposed to be doing, you're largely going to be okay in Milwaukee. That said, we have had some things of late, and I feel like there has been a bit of a shift where you can go into the Third Ward and have a carjacking there, or we had the pastor who was killed by a reckless driver right here in downtown, where we had a mass shooting after a Bucks game, which are things that people do from outside the city themselves, come into the city and patronize and enjoy. And that does, so as someone who sees both sides of that, like, I worry about what is that messaging? And I'd invite you to expand on that, like what you would ask of us in those situations, in those conversations that I still have.
So I get that there are things that happen, but they happen to all of us. They happen to the citizens that live here, and I feel like, yes, there's carjackings in the Third Ward, there's auto thefts downtown, but keep it in perspective, right? When we're talking about, so I went and saw Tootsie at the Marcus Theater on Sunday, because I have season tickets. Anyway, musical person. So I was looking around at the crowd, here I am in the Market Center downtown, right by where all the Bucks thing happened during the playoffs the year before. That's where we did the press conference at Red Arrow Park. So that's like my PTSD every time I go back to Red Arrow Park is having to explain why that many people got shot after the Bucks game that day. But I'm looking around and I'm looking at all the people, like all of these hundreds of people sitting here, probably a lot of them not from Milwaukee, a lot of older people here to see the musical, and they're gonna make it home safe. No one's stealing their car. They're not gonna be victims of carjacking. And so sometimes, and I get that these things happen, and they've happened to other people, and my kids go to school outside of Milwaukee, I live in Milwaukee, and I also have had, we'll come pick you up if you're at your dad's house, but not at your mom's house. That irritates me, because sometimes I think very arrogantly, I could put two of your houses in my house, but that's low, right? Right? But I just am like, there are still educated people that live in this city, that love this city, that don't commit crimes. And I think and I'm not saying that we don't say, hey, be careful when you're going to Third Ward, we're noticing this. We had a valet thing where the valet, you know how they take you get out of the car, you leave the door open, you leave the car in, and then the valet gets there? Don't do that. Because we had then someone waiting to jump in that car. Now, as city people, I would never do that. I'm gonna sit in my car until that valet comes in, but other people not knowing. So there has to be a messaging of safety. This is an urban environment, but it is not the picture, and I feel, and I know I'm biased, and you all can tell I'm biased about my city, but it's not the picture that sometimes we paint. So I just wanna make sure, not that we're not telling those stories, but that we're telling both stories, and that it's fair.
How do you want to do this, Marianne? Will you run the microphone around?
Yep.
Okay, so just like in school, hands up.
And if you can identify yourself, you know, if you're a resident, if you're a community activist, if you're a community leader, just so that, and if you don't want to, that's fine too.
Hi, I'm with the Milwaukee Business Journal, and I'm also a Milwaukee resident. We wrote a couple months ago, there was a meeting with the police chief and several high-profile CEOs, mostly from downtown companies, wondering, Assistant Chief Waldner and Chief Lipski, if you could comment on what has come out of that since then, and if there's been any thought on having similar meetings in other neighborhoods and other communities with employers or community leaders to kind of try to have those public-private partnerships.
Oh, do we have to stand up still?
Are we standing? All right, thank you for your question. I would call for an audit before we get started between Assistant Chief of Police wages and Fire Chief wages based on the house size. So we are having community meetings all the time, both with residents, businesses in the communities. Right here in the downtown area is also included. And one thing that has come out of the specific meeting you're referencing, if I'm on the right page here, is a greater need, and I'm gonna step off of the violent crime thing for a second and talk about a little bit something that Assistant Chief Waldner referenced and the doctor. If we have a fire in a high-rise building, I can send my entire fire department and we're still gonna be outnumbered 5 to 10 to 1. So, I mean, we can't go in and teach everybody when a fire alarm goes off, get up off your chair, walk to the stairwell and leave the building. Like, I don't know how much more we can message this, but if people are smarter than everybody else all the time and are gonna outwit basic clues, we're not gonna be able to save you. We can't wanna save you more than you wanna save yourself all the time, right? And so part of this partnership has really turned into, over several years, and that meeting kind of formalize some of the relationships, has been an understanding of the occupant or resident's responsibility in these structures. Because it doesn't know if you're a fancy corporation or, you know, a one-person home. It doesn't know any of that. The smoke is gonna kill you regardless. And formalizing the relationships between our very heady and oft repetitive fire safety messaging and what can you actually do and what should you do it's taken on a more adult theme. Let me put it that sounded wrong. It's been messaged more directly at an adult audience. And we've started to formalize and build some real partnerships. And not just for the vanilla fire alarm sounding, what should we do? But for all of us sitting here, and all of a sudden we hear gunshots ring out down the hallway. Right? America 2023. What's your plan? Or are you gonna wait? Think about this. Or are you gonna wait for law enforcement and fire to arrive? Start your stopwatch. How fast do you think any of us can get here to start solving that problem for you? And we'll come and do the best we can. But there's things you can do too. So we're starting to get into a whole different range of communication and training and experiences with folks who aren't living in this world here and seeing it every day, so that they might know, hey, here's some things you can do. No idea if I even got close to answering your question.
Okay, next question.
Thank you, officer. Thank you, Dan Steininger. I'm president of the Daniel Hone Foundation. Dan Hone was my grandfather. The mayor declared a state of war in the city of Milwaukee, and you know it's serious. And I hear, as the leaders of enforcement, you can't hire enough police officers. You cannot possibly do what you're doing with the resources you have and the talent. So we've launched a campaign to award cash grants in honor of Daniel Hone, the former mayor of this city, to those who come up with innovative, creative ideas to solve problems, because you in government cannot possibly do it by yourselves. So I asked the news media, and MJS, to their credit, is giving me once a month to talk about those ideas. We will announce the winners come November at the Salute to Government luncheon. We want the news media to understand that the solutions here cannot just be government. It has to be our private citizens. It has to be the resources of private government. So I'm asking the news media, are you guys going to give attention to that? And then we'll bring the ideas to law enforcement and get the community to your fire chief, saying your point. And to the police officer, Nicole, you can't solve these things. We need the community behind you getting these things solved. And there are so many innovative things, technology that can be done. I'm seeing them every month. We're getting overwhelmed. So we're going to be bringing that to you and to the media. What do you think?
Do I have to go to the podium? No, I think it's important that we highlight solutions from all corners of the community, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what ideas are presented this fall. I'm not sure.
I think that's a fair question, fair answer.
Also, I got Dan's card, so we're good. We're covered.
Okay.
You'll get it too.
I'm Denise Calloway. I'm a retired journalist and a semi-retired journalist and a retired PR executive. I have a question for the assistant chief. You talked about that Snow White moment of how you can see these things working so we can better address issues on the front end, or at least not have them become significantly serious. What is standing in the way of that happening, and how can all of us who live in the city like I do, or people who care about the city, how can we become your allies to help some of those things happen? Because it's not like we don't have the solutions. How do we begin to have the collective will, and how do we help you do that?
So resources. So Ashanti and I are working on something right now with prostitution. Like arresting prostitutes does nothing. But yet, I still get complaints from the aldermen on the south side and the residents on the south side. You know, they don't like the prostitution, the street prostitution happening. So, but sending us is only gonna do one thing, right? We have the power to arrest and to make it stop for that moment, but we're not solving the problem. So I need OVP to have all the resources, so all I have to do is call them and say, this is what I got. So if you know of a community group or someone that can offer AODA, things like that, like mental health, I have the county as my resource, I have co-responder teams, I have neighborhood support places that are open during the day. But like AODA, like they mentioned earlier, I don't have very many responses for. Because, well, one, you have to want to. You can't force people into it. And same with prostitution. Jail is not the place. It's not gonna help the person. And quite honestly, it's a citation and a misdemeanor at most. They're not going to jail. That's the reality, right? So why not get them help? So what we're partnering with together is to find other solutions. So that if we stop a prostitute on the street, we can call someone else to come have that interaction with us there or without us there, whatever works best, so that now we can take that person and get them the resources that we need or that they need, so that we're continuously not battling the same problem. But I need those resources for people that want to help with domestic violence. I need shelters. I need, in the winter, the homelessness in the shelters is always a huge thing. Rescue Mission tends to have beds, but they have rules. And so people don't want to go to Rescue Mission.
So how do people help you do that, right?
I
How do people help you do that?
You'd think that I would know all these people, but I don't. And I don't know if it's an interaction of them not wanting to do. They can contact me, they can contact Ashanti. We work together all the time to find other solutions other than incarceration. But I need to know they exist. I need to know what their capacity is. I need to know what they're willing to do, what their hours. Are you going to be on call? Can I call you in the middle of the night when I have something I really need help with? The problem is for 24-hour service. You got me and you got him, right? So we're always the call centers for every single thing that happens. And I need resources and people willing for us to be able to make a connection no matter what. If it can't be in the middle of the night, that's fine. We'll get their hours and their contact information so I can make that connection. But I need people who have services and are willing to help, to contact us so that we can connect them and we can get a process moving.
I sit on 2 boards and you'll be getting calls.
Okay, that's fine. I have my card, so get my card.
Thank you.
This is the conversation we have all the time, is lack of resources.
Right, and how do we have that conversation
Right.
on a bigger scale so more than the people in this room know that you need that help?
Right, right. We just started to help with domestic violence. So we have Sojourner Family Peace Center here in the city, but we have all these other little domestic violent hubs for different culturals and different religions, all these different things that they might feel better connected. So we're starting that conversation to have more resources for that. And but I know there's places out there. I know there's churches that have other treatments. Like I know my church has they have a 12-step program. Going to church, I don't have that interaction, but there's other things that we can connect people to. I just don't know where they exist, and I need to know and what they're willing to do to help. So.
I'm Marilyn Krause, part of the Press Club. For each of our panelists, if you had the ability to offer one potential solution, just one thing that you could say should be put into place that you think would make a difference for any of the things we've talked about, what would that one thing be? Dr. Ken.
I'm good.
What I would put in place is a reminder to people that in the home, statistics have shown over decades that if you would simply graduate from high school, get a job that pays minimum wage, that you can work your way up and start a career, and not have children before you're married, you'll be successful. Somewhere we lost that. Somewhere we lost telling kids, hey, we make mistakes, we're human, let's support you. Now it's out of control. And until we go at that base level that the office is doing and reach people where they are, we're gonna have this conversation next year, and it'll be worse, and nothing will change.
Let me see, should I go through my list? Start with number one. I feel like Whitney Houston up here. I believe that you. But I do believe that there is a foundational need that children have of being accepted, loved, and the belief that the future can be better. And it doesn't need to be a pipe dream for them. It needs to be normal for a child growing up in any city, in any place in this country, to have the feeling that they belong, that they have the resources for a solid education, and that their future is going to be bright. That simple thing our community is not doing for its children, and because it's not, this is where we are.
I have so many more problems than one. So if I had to pick one thing, it has to be guns. The amount of guns and that I've seen over 26 and a half years is just, it's mind blowing. And the fact that you can make a gun on a 3D printer, and you know, we always talk about technology and social media. In some ways it's helped us, but in a lot of ways, without the proper use, without ethical use, it has hurt us so many different ways. So I would say, if I could address anything, it'd be the proper use of guns. I think the CCW law was made without a lot of thought. It didn't go into gun safety. It didn't go into gun retention. It didn't, you know, so it's like, here, you take this course and then you can have a gun and you can carry it around. But there's just so much more to that. And now here we're having this thing where guns are being stolen out of cars all the time. So that's what it would be. There's just too many guns, whether they're legal, whether they're not, whether they're made off of a machine. There's just too many guns and we don't have control, and we put laws in place that didn't address responsibility.
So, please take this in the spirit it's given. But as a society, as Milwaukee, stop asking the police department what they need. What do you need? What do you want? That's the question. And not that we shouldn't help and collaborate and all those things. But they're one department in a city chock full of departments with hundreds of thousands of people in it. As was so eloquently articulated before, they can't possibly solve multi-generational familial breakdowns. They can't solve all of these things when they arrive after the crime happens. I mean, and that's probably, take that out of context and do what you want with it, but stop looking at them like, well, it's the police, so what's the solution? If they had it, they would have done it. They're trying as hard as they possibly can. What do you want? What's acceptable to you? What's your threshold of enough is enough? And start looking at larger systems. I would say in kind of sing-songy kind of phraseology, reject the extremes and start focusing on the commonalities. Because the extremes are killing this place. And I'm not finding a lot of solutions that come out that are long-term when people just spend all their time throwing mud balls back and forth at each other. And that's become just what we do now. And I guess, and I was only supposed to, did you just look at your watch? Oh, man. All right, I'm wrapping up. That's all I have.
I'm Gary Witt from the Baptist City Group. I want to thank you guys who work for the police and fire in the city who do the great work that you do. And I want to publicly apologize to you for putting so much pressure on you to be the ones that have to be the end of the funnel to solve the problem. This has been a 40-year journey of misery for the city of Milwaukee, and it's basically been ignored for 40 years, and now all the pressure's been put on you. In 1970, black unemployment was 8.3% in the city of Milwaukee. In 1980, it jumped to 13.9%, and people thought it was a tragedy. And today it's 25.6%. It's the second worst in America. So hey, we're not the worst. It was the second worst in America. So when the high-paying and low-skilled jobs went away, crime, violence, drugs, and failing schools followed. Our solution can't simply be more police and more fire department people. I would ask, when the city will begin to focus on ways to train and employ those who've been stripped systematically of their right to work by the greed of American companies who move these high-paying, low-skilled jobs out of the country, or simply tantalizingly out of reach in like Grafton or like Oak Creek, where our really remedial county transportation system doesn't reach. Over 51% of black children live in poverty in Milwaukee, and 40% of Hispanic children and 35% of Asian children are living in poverty. It's a big issue, and I would hope that instead of always talking about how we're gonna either police people or resurrect them back from the dead after they've overdosed on drugs, we talk about how to train them and put them to work, because it's the only thing that's gonna reach our goal of having the mayor hit his 1 million living citizens in Milwaukee.
Coming, Joanne.
My name is Joanne Williams, and I'm a journalist. Something that I've always wanted to know. Have you ever gone to talk to these people who committed the crimes and asked them what made them do it? What drove them to it? What were they afraid of? And what they want to see as a change, not in our society, but in their life, so they don't do it again. Have you ever talked to those people? I mean, we have all these commissions and committees and organizations, but what about the people who have been affected by it directly? What do they say?
He has 30 seconds.
Fantastic question, and I want to brag on a couple of friends of mine, Shannon Ross and Adam Procell. I don't know if you've heard of an outfit called Paradigm Shift. It is laser spot on exactly what you're talking about. And what this is, these are folks who committed crimes, went through the criminal justice system, were plopped back out onto the street, and realized immediately nothing changed. In fact, my situation worsened in there. It was not the Shangri-La described in the jail system that would be ideal, right? And they have dedicated the rest of their lives. You can tell this is a pure calling for these two. And what they are doing is they are connecting either regular citizens and people who are incarcerated or post-incarceration, law enforcement personnel with people who are incarcerated or post-incarceration. We've started to integrate them into bringing them into fire stations to talk with firefighters and paramedics. And an interesting thing happened. And there might be a there there, and we're in the middle of figuring that out. In the closed privacy of the fire station, with with these gentlemen there for lunch, I asked my firefighters and paramedics who's been to a shooting this week. Every hand. Who's been to a fatal shooting this week? Every hand. Who's been to a multiple shooting this week? Most of the hands. And I asked my firefighters, which is not an easy thing for us to do, to like bare our souls about like what that actually looks like and means and feels like and smells like. I said, tell them about one of these shootings. And this is what made me fall in love with these two. They sat wrapped in, they were glued to what was being described to them. And they shook their head and they said, we had no idea. We had no idea what that impact was when we were doing that and causing that. We had no idea that, I mean, that's just something you see on television, firefighters and ambulances, right? They said we had no idea. And they were like racked with like years later guilt all of a sudden, and that was not the point of the exercise. We just were having a conversation about crime and impacts, and we're exploring a way to expand that, because maybe there's something there that kind of the feel-good purity of fire and EMS, I guess, connecting that with people who have committed or maybe at risk to commit, to think of that impact. I don't know. She's like, nah, I'm not buying it.
Yeah. It's a start.
We're going there.
Thank you, sir. He's giving me the remainder of his time. And that's something that we're making as part of the protocol for dealing with some of the referrals that we get, is to actually have those conversations during, and it's been enlightening already. And it's something that's probably been part of the outreach that the chief just spoke of. But so we have a number of teams that have been dealing with families like this very intimately during these time periods, with the effort of being able to elicit from them exactly the point that you're getting to, not even just the offenders, but also the family members around the offender. And in almost every situation, I'm saying almost because there are cases where people are just not responsive, but there's almost immediate regret for what happened, which points to the fact that if people just simply had been forced to take the time to even think about the consequences of this behavior and not have it be an emotional reaction in the moment, if they didn't have a gun right there at their disposal when these things were happening, that things may have turned out a whole lot differently in that situation. And many of them who are around the offenders oftentimes speak to their multiple efforts of having reached out for resources or engagement for support when they attempted to intervene themselves and didn't have the support necessary, or didn't think that they had access to the type of support that was necessary in order to have an impact and change in behavior. But almost always there's an immediate regret for the consequences of what just happened. Not even the consequences. It's almost as if they were willing to accept the consequences, but an immediate regret of their initial response to how they handled the situation. So, which tells us a little bit of something about our society and the community in general, that we are surrounded by a lot of these horrible situations, but people are not as horrible as many of these situations make them appear to be.
Do we have a final question?
It's a lot of pressure. Reggie Moore, I direct the Division of Community Safety Policy and Engagement with the Medical College of Wisconsin. And a couple things I just want to underscore. I know Mr. Calloway had to leave. All of us wear multiple hats. You're not just a journalist. You may be a parent. You may have a political affiliation. You may have a religious affiliation. It's important that this conversation is not isolated to one representation or one identity. There's a state budget being discussed right now. There are decisions being made every day by private corporations, by government, that this gentleman spoke to, that have created the conditions that we see in the city and cities like Milwaukee around the country. Director Hamilton held up a book briefly, if you can do it again, please. I know we have a short memory in this community. The Blueprint for Peace, which can be found at forwardforlife.com, was developed over an entire year by thousands of community members. And we had a panel at Community Baptist Church, I believe, where we had a panel of shooters. People had shot people and survivors, and that conversation happened. They were a part of what's in that blueprint. And there are 6 goals and 30 strategies that correlated with a consistent 4-year decline in homicides and non-fatal shootings without an increase in arrests in this city. So the production of public safety and the production of community safety, we have to have a vision beyond confinement, containment, and control, and one that is empathetic and one that is rooted in public health. And I don't have a question, these are more affirmations. The last affirmation, or the thing that I want to call out, is the importance of consistency and sound leadership. And I must say, with Director Hamilton, with the current police chief, the current fire chief, there's an effort called VR Fast that launched in 2021 after the historic spike in homicides that we saw. That basically where you have over 50 individuals representing city, state, county, MPD, law enforcement, fire, violence interruption, safe and sound, etc., who are taking the same coordinated approach to gun violence in the city that we took to COVID. And I had never seen the level of coordination as a chief in your hero status around COVID. I was saying, and a lot of us had the same epiphany, what if we had that same coordinated approach to gun violence in the city? And that has started. And so I just want to affirm and acknowledge the importance, because we have not always had that level of leadership in the police department. We have not always had the level of leadership and coordination that we're seeing in the city. So, and then also Ms. Luthern, who's done an amazing job in terms of the deep level of reporting. And if you may recall the forum that we had with the community, where the community was able to unfiltered share their perspectives of how murder and crime in the city are reported. And the decisions that were made and the way that many of you as journalists actually report and not showing mugshots all the time, being intentional about humanizing, that it wasn't assumed to be gang violence or drug violence, but saying this was somebody's child, this was somebody's parent, someone's uncle, auntie, cousin, and humanizing those stories. Again, I think we all have the power to make a difference, not only how the stories are told, but the reality that we're all trying to produce together. So I just thank you for this forum.
Thank you all for your questions. We could talk about this all day, and we should continue the conversations and find those solutions as well. Please join me in thanking our panelists and also our journalists. On behalf of the Milwaukee Press Club, again, thank you all for being here. If you have any interest in being a member of the Milwaukee Press Club, Joette Richards, our administrator, is here. She can help you out. And please check our website and Facebook page for upcoming events and hopefully more conversations like we had today. Thank you very much.